And so while we're experts in brain development, we're not experts in everything. For example, what about nutrition? That's why I'm happy to have Dr. Cody Golman join us today to help us learn more about how diet impacts not just physical health, but also brain function, behavior, and overall well-being. We know that you are what you eat, garbage in, garbage out. But this is not going to be your typical discussion about optimizing your fuel. Did you know that when you were a baby, your body was tuned to digest and process food differently, and that there's a way to get back to that more efficient way? So let me introduce Dr. Cody Goldman. Dr. Goldman has worn many hats in his life: Army tank commander, healer, entrepreneur, and now an expert in hormonal health and sustainable weight loss. As the founder of one of Denver's largest healing centers, he's helped countless people reconnect with their bodies, regain energy, and achieve wellness by addressing the root causes of imbalance. His approach focuses on resetting hormones to restore natural fat burning, optimize brain and body function, which is especially relevant for parents navigating the challenges of raising children with neurodevelopmental disorders, including navigating food restrictions. Dr. Goldman, I can't wait to get deep into what I think I'm going to call it resetting your digestive system for now, but I imagine you're going to correct me and expand on that. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I like to start with understanding a little bit where you're coming from, what inspired you to dedicate your work to helping people, reset their health and hormones. Was there a personal or a pivotal moment that planted the seed or set you on this path?
Well, um, since my early, since being 17 years old and being an Army tank commander, um, I saw very quickly that when I went to the doctor, any symptom I had, they would find a pill for, and I would take that pill, and I really didn't understand what the pill was for. And when I started researching it, the pill wasn't to actually make me feel better or not make me heal. It was there to suppress a symptom, which maybe did make me feel better, but it wasn't there to really fix the underlying cause. And so that is one of the first pivotal moments, having numbness and arm pain and asthmas and allergies and getting inundated with medications, realizing at 19, by age 19, I just literally wasn't getting healthy. And I realized that health doesn't come from a pill. It doesn't come from a bottle. And so over the, last 20 years, having run a healthcare center, I figured out ways to help people heal naturally. But I saw one issue was quite, affecting just about everybody. And that's excess fat. And over the course of COVID, excess fat started to become normalized. You start seeing plus size models in Target and Victoria's Secret. And it started telling you to love your fat. And that started irritating me because anyone who understands the human body knows that fat is the number one killer of humans. It's linked to all three top of the leading causes of death. We already know that is one of the things that the main things that decrease your life expectancy. So that's what led me on the path to say, screw this. I'm gonna stop that ridiculous message of loving your fat while you're killing yourself. And simultaneously, I saw my patients doing things like Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers and paleo and keto and destroying their hormones and making themselves more sick and actually not losing weight. They might lose weight, but they gain it all back. So that's truly was the inspiration behind, why I do this.
It was there. Did something happen to little Cody, when you were a kid that planted the seed for all this?
No, I think it really started to happen, well, I was aware of it at 17, but probably even as a kid, um, watching my parents send me to the doctor when I was sick and, just like everyone else, get a flu shot, take a cold medication. It wasn't until 17, 18, 19 that I started going, wait a minute, I take this pill, it's there for 7 days, and I literally ask myself, what happens if I don't take this pill? The answer, I got better on my own. And if people literally ask their doctor that question, that would be the answer. You'll get better on your own. You don't take a cold pill, you don't take a flu vaccination, flu shot. What happens is your immune system kicks in. So I was probably very sick as a kid, but realizing by the time I was 19, interesting, what happens if I don't take this pill? I'm already sick. What happens if I don't take this pill? That's really what probably spurred all this on.
Hmm. Now, I think we have to explain or clarify a couple of things. You talk about, I don't want everybody to tune out and say this guy is fat shaming everybody. I know that there's some good intentions behind promoting people who are less than skinny, and maybe we're seeing the pendulum swing a little far and like in everything, w is there what would you have to say to your detractor to say, oh yeah, oh, slow down, Tiger. I don't also want to traumatize myself into thinking that I'm a bad person because up till now I wasn't able to take care of my body properly, or maybe I've got some hormonal imbalances or genetic conditions, and I'm doing my best here, sir.
Hmm. So let's see, what's the specific question? Because I want to make sure in anything I said that hopefully you didn't hear was shaming fat. I was telling you to stop accepting your fat and stop loving it because it's killing you. That's the fact. That's a scientific fact. So nothing that you need to be shameful for, but it is lessening the quality of your life, right? So number one, pain is one of the best motivators we have. So one of the big messages I have is I would suggest not avoiding pain. So if you hear this message and you hear me saying the fat is killing you, and that you go, oh my God, I got to take care of it, that might actually motivate you to shift this, right? Now, that has nothing to do with whether or not you know how to lose fat, right? In all fairness, the ways you've been told to lose fat are mostly incorrect. So I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm telling you that most of this is inaccurate. Most of the ways you've been told to lose fat is inaccurate. That's why over a third of America is overweight. Over a third of Americans are overweight.
I thought it was more than that, actually.
Well, there's even more depending on where you look at it, obese and overweight, but
Yeah.
it's over 99 million Americans. It's probably climbing as we move, right? But interesting of this is most of this is, and a lot of these people are doing, and that's really what we're here to talk about, are doing a lot of these unhealthy diets, and they're calling them healthy. Fasting, paleo, keto. There's so much confusion in this. Okay, so let's separate out what you were saying is if you're striving to lose weight, right? You might necessarily not have the right information, right? But it doesn't separate out the fact that the fat truly is the number one linked to these major causes of disease. So I found that one of the best things I could do is show people the right way to actually do this so they stop the harmful diets. Most of the time, people are causing more harm than good in their diets. And that's just one of the other facts too, calorie deficits and so forth. So yes, this has nothing to do with loving yourself, right? You loving yourself is inevitable, but that's a whole nother subject that we can talk about at some point, loving yourself.
Thank you. There's a couple of directions we can go with this episode from here. Um, I hear you say a lot of things about uh, losing weight in a healthy way and we can talk about resetting hormones and talking about something that you mentioned that sort of struck a chord when we were preparing for this, which is when you're a baby, you process food differently and it gradually, it doesn't evolve, it doesn't improve, it just sort of regresses because of habits and how you can get back to it. So we could go there. And I wish we had a way to sort of poll live people listening,
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we also have a lot of parents of listening in who have kids with neurodevelopmental conditions, and they have very restrictive, either because they have sensory processing issues that make them avoid certain foods, or the doctors have imposed a restricted diet, avoid sugars, avoid casein, avoid gluten, for all sorts of reasons. And I think those would be two different directions. Maybe if we have time, we could do both. Which one do you think would, if we start with one, then it may overlap with the other, and then we'll just have to do a little bit of the last one. Which one do you think would be the best one to start with?
Let's start with understanding physiology
Let's
and
do that.
understanding how you're born. I think it'd be the best. So just understand that when you're born, there's any many references in different theological texts towards fat. But when you're born, you are designed to be a fat burner. And fat is your best source of fuel. You have the best sleep when you burn fat. You have the best energy when you burn fat. You have the best emotional balance when you burn fat. You have the best IQ when you burn fat. These are scientific, biological facts. At least in America, other countries are certainly different. Some are the same. But in our country, you got to understand there's a lot of history behind this of why we got to have so much sugar in our food. It's not just Americans. This has been happening for thousands of years. There's a book, great book called Sugar Blues, written by William Duffy, and he tracks the rise and fall of major civilizations, over the course of hundreds of years. And what you see is countries and civilizations that controlled sugar became wealthy. They also became sick. So you'll see for every 1 to 3, 4, 500 years, a civilization would become very, very wealthy, very wealthy. There are people be eating sugar, and all of a sudden they start being very, very sick. And at some point, some other civilization took them over. This has been happening for a long time. Okay. So it's important to understand that America's in that cycle right now. We've controlled many more things just than sugar. But in our food, the FDA, your government, has allowed chemicals that cause cancer in our food. Now, I've been saying this for 20 years, but the cool thing is we just have a new administration that's in charge of our healthcare, RFK Jr., who's now exposing these things. Things like red dyes, yellow level 40, right? Red dye number 5. These are things that were banned from other countries. When you look at a box of cereal, our cereal in America has 12 to 15 more ingredients than the same exact cereal in another country. These are because
Wow.
these are, yeah, yeah, exactly. So other countries, for example, we have something called Fruit Loops. Fruit Loops are dyed with red number 5 and yellow 40, known carcinogens. And when you go over to Australia, they use beet juice and celery to color their food because they know it causes cancer. So, where I'm going with all this is that people don't realize how much their food has been poisoned. And sugar was one of those things that is an incredible fuel source. But what happens is your brain and body would become efficient at whatever you give it over time. And so, one of the cheapest things to do in the 1960s, the Sugar Foundation paid Harvard researchers to falsify evidence. This is documented. You guys can look this up. To falsify evidence to that fat causes fat or sugar causes fat. They did a little bit of research and found that sugar was causing people to get fat. However, Harvard was paid to post the journal, an American Medical Journal, to say that fat is what's causing you to be fat. That was in 1960. We didn't find this until 30, 40 years later that was false. The reason that the Sugar Foundation paid Harvard researchers to lie to the American public is so that they could remove fat from your food and add sugar. So they could put the label low fat on your food and you think you're healthy now. So since the 1960s, if you bought low fat food, you were most likely eating sugar, the thing that caused you to be fat.
Mhm.
So there's a lot behind this, but that is what creates and the hormone flip. Okay, so there's several hormones, leptin and ghrelin, that identify fat as a fuel source or will flip over to sugar. It's really a pretty magical thing, by the way, when you think about it. It's like your car one day going from regular gasoline to diesel. It's adaptation, it's beautiful, but you don't realize it's happening. And what part of what I like to do is make sure someone knows what's happening so that switch is not unconscious. We consciously know how to switch it back to fat.
All right, just to um, make this, I was going to say relevant to our audience, kids, ADHD, autism, Down syndrome, all sorts
Absolutely.
of developmental disorders. How did this switch, or how those using? Okay, you said leptin and ghrelin, right? How do these hormones affect behavior, cognitive processing, overall health, growth?
Beautiful
Is this
question.
something for those particular
Great
kids?
question. Great question. Well, first of all, it's important to understand that you got to know this for parents out there knowing this is, but when you burn fat as a fuel source, remember I told you you have your best IQ? I'm not just making that up. You are in much more intelligent when you burn fat as a fuel source. When you burn sugar, first of all, there's a beautiful thing. It's a dopamine release. So sugar activates the brain's reward system, right? And that dopamine neurotransmitter, in many ways, controls mood, behavior, ability to learn, memory. So that dopamine release forces it'll sort of reinforce the behavior of having more sugar. So it's an interesting chemical because it actually is teaching your brain what to do. Um, let's look at this though. So we're not just bad mouthing sugar. Why would our body and our brain use sugar like that? Ancestrally, this is important to understand. You got to understand that our brains have been evolving for, maybe a million years. From the animal brain to the human brain is a big difference. Inside the, and by the way, you still have an animal brain. There's primitive centers in the brain, right? The amygdala and hippocampus, there's parts that are more primitive. They do one of two things: avoid pain and chase pleasure. What I've found is that when you put enough sugar into a kid and you eventually become a sugar burner, you flip further into the primitive brain centers. And those primitive brain centers, again, are there to avoid pain and chase pleasure. Now, I'm not saying this to scare people, but this typically is what creates different addictive behaviors. If, let's say, for example, dopamine, if I get used to having my dopamine releases, right, I will eventually try to find other things that give me that dopamine release. It usually makes it very hard for us to sit in calmness and centeredness. This is something certainly as a kid, I didn't grow up healthy. I grew up on a lot of boxed foods. But what'll happen is you'll see a lot more mood swings because sugar creates a quick burst of energy. Okay. Ancestrally, let's say we see our animal ancestors walking around and they, think about this. Food wasn't readily available. We weren't like, going to grocery stores. We were, whenever you got something, you got something. You had to really harness it, right?
Hmm.
So
And maybe
when you
that's the only
got
thing you would get for days.
for days or weeks, exactly, exactly. So it's interesting when you saw a berry, something colorful, which by the way, this is why food companies dye your food red and yellow and colorful, just so you know. It's because your primitive brain sees energy. But let's go back. Primitive brain sees berries, and that was a quick way for us to get energy. So if you need to go fight something, you're gonna load yourself full of some berries, and I can go fight. So there's a lot of benefits to sugar. But the problem is now is that when that's the primary thing inside all of our foods, that's when it starts flipping over. So I'll see mood swings, I'll see cognitive decline. Um, high sugar diets lead to excess glucose in the brain, and that's been linked to memory and cognitive deficiencies, right? Um, so those are a few of the things that we talked about.
All right. So let's sit on that one for a couple of seconds. We have parents who one of them, for example, just shared that her child would only eat white foods. Uh, uh, there's one particular can of food, and the kid will knows exactly what it tastes like to the point where, parents if would not be able to make a difference, but the kid can make a difference, and that's the only brand he'll eat. And even if they switch and keep the can and put something else of a different brand that looks the same, the kid will know. So we have a kid who's very, very restricted. Um, how would you help a parent like that navigate, you know, these sort of preferences while balancing, health priorities?
Mhm. Well, something that's important to bring to this conversation, so that way when people hear me saying sugar, I want to make sure that we also understand what we're talking about here, because it's not just sugar inside, a candy. I want to also address simple carbohydrates. So what you said, so flour, bread, cereal, rice, pastas. These simple carbohydrates break down into sugar in your system. So just understand that, let's say you don't eat candy, but you eat bread all day long, you are loading yourself full of sugar. This will actually reset your receptors. Okay. So that specific example, I would love to actually talk to the mom and the family to understand what's truly going on. Because, for a child, right, to be restricting themselves to that point, usually there's something else behind that. Okay. I would love to know what the history is of what occurred with this child prior to this point. Because here's what I'll tell you is things aren't what they seem. When you go to the doctor and you're tested for food allergies, and they tell you, oh, you can't eat pork, you can't eat this. I have watched as underlying unresolved emotions are balanced, all of a sudden, now you can eat certain foods. I've watched this 1,000 times.
It's
So we
interesting.
gotta go ahead.
Sorry, I
You're good.
interrupted you, but we see the
Oh,
same um, when we treat our clients, and we don't do anything with food or digestion, but we help the brain regulate its chemistry. We help the brain increase processing speed. All of a
yep.
sudden, allergies that were prominent become under.
Bingo.
And
Bingo.
so, I mean, we just assumed that there was this strong brain gut connection. They've seen, and so you improve the brain, you improve the gut. We also saw some studies showing that some smells in particular triggered an immune response with the skin, but also inside the gut. And so somehow this enriching the environment and providing your brain with an opportunity to sort of heal itself and building reserves and improving its function had an impact on all of this. Where's the overlap with what you're seeing?
So, I've almost, of course, I run the Fast 40 weight loss program, but I don't treat people as a body. If you believe that you're a body, and if your doctor treats you as a body, it's not going to work well. Why? Because you are an energetic being that has a mind and a body. You're not a body, you have a body. And you got to understand that your body is a loudspeaker. The body's not a cause, the body's an effect. And when someone truly gets that principle, that's the principle that most of our healthcare system medically has completely overlooked. We treat the body like it's an effect. So that's why it's important to understand when I see there's some condition or something happening in the body, I already know the body's not the cause. Since the body is the loudspeaker of your consciousness, the number one place to bounce and really heal is inside the brain. So we go through, and I won't go through in details of this, but we'll go and bounce perceptions. Um, Remember I was telling you about the avoid pain, chase pleasure thing?
Hmm.
So when someone is running a program that is seeking dopamine, we will unlock and rewire, I should say, that response. And it's not hard to rewire that dopamine response. Once you do, I'll start noticing decisions change dramatically. So again, when you balance perceptions in the brain, the body will follow. Since the body is not a cause, it's an effect.
Hmm. So, going back to this child who's got a very restricted diet because of, sensory issues or behavioral challenges, you're saying, let's look at the history, let's look at targeting, helping the kid's brain, and some of those restrictions or some of those behaviors around food are going to just solve themselves. Is there something, is there like a cue or clue from the child's behavior that tells you he's ready to evolve in his food preferences?
It's probably too it's kind of a it's a challenging thing to answer because without actually speaking to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. There's just way too many variables. I wouldn't really know. I will tell you that a very true and unpopular belief system is that your kids will express your repressions. So it's interesting because I've watched as, let's just say, I've watched many kids, for example, give an example. Um, let's say I'm really, really angry. A lot of parents don't want to show their kids, they kind of hide their emotions. They want their kids to think that they're perfect. The more that you push down inside yourself as a parent, the more your kids will express those things. Now, there's a lot of science behind this, and we probably don't have time to go into. That's why I would talk to both of them. I'm not just looking at the child's upbringing. I'm looking at the interaction of mom and dad around the child.
Let's go back. You're dropping bombshell after bombshell, and I'm trying to just like, okay, we've got 30 minutes to do this.
Right, right.
Um, let's address the sugar versus fat burning a little bit.
Yeah.
Eh, I'm going out on a limb here. I may have to verify this with our program director, but I remember in a treatment of seizure disorders in particular that trying to go on a ketogenic diet was pretty helpful in managing seizures. Okay, now I'm dropping a completely unfounded,
Yeah.
it's my memory. So I just want to raise the subject. Raise it as a question. Have you heard this? Have you seen people with conditions? And I've heard you say things about certain diets are a bad implementation and a poor way of resetting your hormones. Can you talk about ketogenic stuff and brain health?
Yeah, I mean, it's not too complex. Remember, ketogenic truly just means you're allowing your body to break foods down into the ketone bodies from fatty acids. So you're starting to actually move into fat burning. Remember, this is how I start off saying, if you burn fat as a fuel source, you'll be infinitely healthier, both physically and mentally. If you burn sugar as a fuel source, you'll find a lot of disease in your body. So ketosis or a ketogenic, is the start towards where we're going. We have bypassed ketogenic, and ketogenic is kind of like 30 years old now in terms of what we do. We help people go to lipolysis. So I'd love for people to move beyond ketogenic because what people are doing in ketogenic is they'll do a temporary ketogenic diet, which removes all kinds of stuff, even fruits, right? And what happens is you can only do it for so long. The moment you stop your diet, the weight comes back on. I'm not a fan of doing stuff temporarily. I don't think if it's not something you can do long term, it might be fine to initiate this, but most people aren't doing this correctly. So we actually help people move into lipolysis, which means fat breaking down. And it involves the release of fatty acids from adipose tissue. And so we're triggering your body to use its fat storage. And when you do that, you're basically, instead of your body laying fat down for storage, it's actually utilizing what it's there for. So there's a lot behind this as to how we do this, but that's where what I would love people to move towards is lipolysis, not, ketogenesis.
Um, can you boil things down further? Or sorry, that's not what I meant. I'd like to get a bit practical now, out of the science weeds and more into the dining table weeds or the
Mhm.
pantry weeds. Um, what's a good habit to start with if you've been eating Fruit Loops, American Fruit Loops, for the last 20 years? Is going cold turkey a good idea? Pros and cons of doing that. What's a good initial practical step?
I'll just tell you what we do. Um, listen, this is something where you could Google for days on all kinds of practical steps. I'll just tell you what works. What works for us to reset people's hormones is we remove all breads, cereals, all sugars, pastas, white breads, remove them all for 40 days. Let's look at science. Scientifically, if you remove sugar from your system for 40 days, your body has a better chance of going back to using fat. And I'm not saying it will, because I've had many people do this and it doesn't do much. So we combine um, that kind of eating, and we eat lean meats, vegetables, and fruits. I want to make sure people stop the false belief that they got to remove fruits because they're over sugaring themselves. It's not the same, not the same at all. But we have people end up losing 15 to 30 pounds of fat and have a complete hormone reset in 40 days following that specific diet. Now, I do a few of the things with this. If you've been a sugar burner for 30 days, 40 days removing sugar, you'll reset your hormones. If you've been a sugar burner for 30 years, probably not going to work in 40 days. So we have a herbal supplement that we use to help trigger the hypothalamus to go back to burning fat. But in all of that, your eating times are important. Your eating amounts are important. How much water you drink is important. It's not just about changing the diet. Do you store stress or do you let it move through you? All these things are vitally important. So in those 40 days, we personally coach people to make sure they know how much to eat, when to eat, what to eat, how to manage stress, and how much water to drink. There's a whole series of things that make us long-term successful. And by the way, just so you know this, the American statistic is that 80% of weight loss programs fail. You gain all the weight back. That's why I created this, because no one was truly learning their body. So I really wanted to really create something where someone actually understood how their body worked, not how to temporarily starve themselves with a calorie deficit to lose some weight, but how do I give myself enough nourishment? How do I give myself eating on time and eating enough to lose weight? So those are the things I'd probably recommend.
And it sounds like at least a few of those steps would be applicable even in the most restricted diets because of behaviors or sensory issues, and hopefully a combination of, a brain healing program like ours, along with your recommendation would just help the kids regulate or feel in such a way that their sensory issues and their behavior issues that were preventing them from being able to evolve in their food and being able to have a healthy approach to eating would resolve themselves. And again, so it sounds like it's a one. It requires coaching. It requires a sophisticated approach because every situation is unique. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, well, let me give you practicality in terms of sugar. So some of the stuff you're talking about is I've seen parents where it's both parents and adults where sugar is as addictive, if not more, than cocaine. So when you with your kid, if your kid's only eating white bread and macaroni and like you're saying, that's all they'll eat, there's a reason why that's all they eat. Because their brain is literally telling them that's what's giving me fuel. So you got a kind of a battle ahead of us, right? But I don't believe it's much different in the adult brain that is the kid brain. Now, of course, there's a few other things there, but the deal is most I'll watch this because I work with mainly adults now. Most adults have never been shown how to feel an emotion. Now, why would that be relevant? Because most people are seeking dopamine to get out of a bad feeling. That's the primitive brain I was talking about. So when we've been taught that it's not okay to feel bad, we will seek a dopamine, something to give us a dopamine hit. And so with adults, I teach them to actually sit in an emotion. And most people have never done this before. So let's just say they feel bad about their relationship. What most people unconsciously do is go grab a donut, which gives you dopamine, and it goes, my life is good. The problem is your life never changes and you actually get yourself pretty sick, right? So I'll give you a practical step. I'll have people stop and actually sit in a bad feeling. This is one of the scariest things that people have told me they've ever done is to actually sit in their own anger. Now, I've got a 6-year-old daughter, so I have practiced with her to have her sit in her emotions. I don't mean sit and dwell in it. I mean truly allow it to be a willing participant with it. Because I can tell you that most people's minds label emotions incorrectly. When I've sat with the feeling of alone, that feeling of alone has turned into full love and appreciation. But my mind would call it alone. I've watched as people are excited about something, label the excitement as anxiety. You see, I found the brain has a very hard time understanding emotions. And it's an incredible tool, but I haven't found that it's really good at labeling and understanding emotions. And so there's a different muscle that I help people build to when we look at feeling emotions. And I think this is really relevant with kids is do we let our kids feel bad or do we try to seek them to feel better? If that's the case, we're teaching them something. I allow, and something my parents never showed me how to do, and it's fine. But every time I'd cry, my dad would say, "Hey, stop crying. You don't get what you want like that." Well, that taught me that you don't cry. And now I get to do this a little different with my daughter. When she's sad, I actually will sit in the sadness with her. And what happens is the sadness fully moves through her and she comes back to love and appreciation. But most of us are taught to repress an energy or an emotion or express it. But none of us have really ever been shown how to allow an emotion to move through us. And when we allow an emotion through and you're not fighting an emotion, you're not resisting it, I find that the seeking of dopamine or sugar seems to go away because you're not looking for the outside to feel better. Now, I said a lot
Mm.
there, so
Yes, yes. I think a lot of what you're saying is going to be familiar to our audience. We've talked a lot with parenting experts about this idea of allowing feelings to happen
beautiful, beautiful.
and being healthy about not repressing and things like that. We talked a lot about brain chemistry regulation because it's sort of wheelhouse a little bit. And it sounds like it's all coming, and it's really nice to see it how this has an impact on things like impacting the way your brain is going to manage digestion, right? And this is where I feel like our conversation is unique, is this impact on digestion. What do you find is one of a very common misconception around digestion and sugar besides what you've already said?
Oh, sure. I think it'd be a fun little conversation. I almost died in 2019. I was sick. I didn't walk for 6 months. My organs shut down, and I got to the point where I couldn't spell my name. And this is where I started learning about gut bacteria. I had parasites, black mold, and Lyme disease. And here's where I'm saying all this. There's no amount of research and studying that can teach me this now. Your gut bacteria are your friend, and your gut bacteria need to be nurtured. Sugar feeds bad gut bacteria. Specifically, though, all those white things we talked about, all those white things. By the way, do you know why our bread became white? Do you know that why that happens? Because
No,
bread's not
no.
naturally white. Do you know that? Bread's not naturally
I,
white.
I I knew that. I don't know. I'm gonna venture a guess. Bleaching.
It was bleaching, but why? Because back in the day, kings and queens, it was looked on as a wealthy thing when you could afford to bleach your bread. So only the wealthy did this. They bleached their bread. But when they bleached it, that's why they call it enriched bread. You're bleaching all the nutrients out and then you put them back in, and it's terrible for you. So that's how that all goes started. Just understand, when you look at the history of why things occurred, you're like, wait a minute, that has nothing to do with any kind of enrichment or any kind of vitamins or minerals.
Mm-hmm.
That had to do with the status. That was a status symbol, white bread. So, um, so anyway, simple carbohydrates, bad bacteria. Everyone is so focused on rebuilding their gut bacteria, but it's not that complex. If you remove bread, cereal, rice, pasta, all the sugars and the white stuff, your gut bacteria will massively change. But when you do this, you've got to feed your gut bacteria. So what a
Mm-hmm.
good gut bacteria like? Onions, cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, garlic. These are things that people will tell me they have sensitivities to. Why? Because their gut bacteria is effing with them. When you have an imbalance in gut bacteria, your bad gut bacteria will literally make you feel sick when you eat something that's healthy for you. You will feel terrible when you eat broccoli, green beans. You'll feel sick. It's a beautiful system. It's survivability. And understand that bacteria have been here for millions of years longer than us, and they'll probably be here after us. So when you look at this, we're dealing with a very advanced, very intelligent species. And when you remove those sugars and you start putting good things in, you'll feel terrible for a little while. Bacteria are so intelligent that when you remove sugars and you start putting good stuff in, you'll feel gas, you'll feel bloating, and this is where you'll go to the doctor and they'll say, "Oh, you got irritable bowel syndrome and blah 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 blah." You'll feel terrible. What the bacteria are doing is when you starve them, they start dying off. There's something called the die-off effect. They start releasing neurotoxins into your system to make you feel like crap. So that's why it's so hard to change gut bacteria. They don't typically people don't have the foresight to know, oh, the bacteria is making me feel bad, so I should keep going. The bacteria want you to feel bad. When you eat broccoli and you feel bad, they go, oh, this is what most humans do is, oh, broccoli's bad for me. Whoop, the cauliflower is bad for me. And they go, you know what I can eat? Ooh, I do so much better with white bread. I do so much better with that cookie. BS. You're listening to the bad gut bacteria.
Fun one. And again, it feels so applicable to a wide range of our audience, and I'm grateful we had this discussion. So you said when I asked about, what's the one practical thing that maybe people can try, and you said remove all sugars. That felt a little drastic. And so I'd like to confirm that and clarify a little bit before we end an episode that says the first thing you can try before talking to Dr. Goldman is remove all sugars for a while. It, is this really the first step you'd do?
Let me return the question back on you. And listen, I love using some shock value for things, right? Um, I'm a cocaine addict. I really need to get off cocaine. What would you suggest that I do?
Well, it's back to my question, cold turkey versus gradual. I don't know. I don't know. There's people who are like big on cold turkey, and there's some people who are say no, no. And make sure that they can consume a tiny little bit of medically controlled substance that sort of soothes their
Right.
brain into gradually. I don't know.
No, that's why I turned it back on you. I agree with what you said. Everything you said, I just agree with. It was like there's different theories, but I'll tell you what I've experienced.
Mhm.
If you have a cocaine addict who's given themselves a little bit of cocaine, every time they do that, the receptors go, ah, cocaine, we're here again, and they stay alive. I'm just telling you, it doesn't matter how little or how much. That's what happens.
All right,
Uh,
so you're saying 30 days, 40 days? You
40
said
days,
40 days
and
of no bread, no sugars, no pasta.
yeah,
You also said, I think you said 30 days earlier. I like
40,
40. 40 sounds like a,
40 days
I
of
don't know.
nourishing yourself. Let's put it more perspective. I'm telling you to 40 days of eating nourishing food. That's what's so funny is we're telling you to cut out the thing that's giving you a false sense
Yeah,
of
it's true. I'm thinking a lot of people, if you tell them to remove all these things, there's not a whole lot left. It's not like they were eating lots of vegetables and lots of fruit with their bread and their pastas. It's usually sort of a big portion of it is, the white stuff and then a
right.
couple of green beans on the side as a side dish. It's always funny when I go to a restaurant and they're surprised when I say, "Can I double or triple the vegetables?" Because I didn't want just two twigs of asparagus next to my thing. I said, "This is
Good
a
point.
side. This is not a dish." It's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so yes, you're
that's a
right.
good
We need
point.
to point to we need to. It's going to be the same maybe volume on the plate, but instead of filling it with sugars and pastas and the white stuff, we're going to fill it with
Yeah.
lots of different colors.
Well,
That's
yeah,
kind of
here's
how
the
my
thing. Yeah.
mother talks to our kids. She talks
True.
about
That's true.
colors.
That's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. Here's the thing you got to understand. You're hitting the nail on the head because that's why I asked you the way I asked you. You're like, oh my gosh, this might sound drastic. Remove all sugars. I'm like, no, we're actually having you just eat nourishing food. Nutrient rich, caloric dense food is what we're asking you to do. Right. So look at this. Why do they serve bread at restaurants when you first sit down? Why do they do that?
Because people ask for it.
Nope. It's because statistically, when someone eats bread before their meal, they're more statistically uh, apt to order dessert. You spend more money. Why? In the very beginning of your meal, if you eat sugar, white bread, your body breaks down to sugar, you're more likely to buy dessert. I'm a restaurant owner. I'm going to give you free sugar so you can buy the expensive sugar at the end.
That's a
This is
good business
science.
model.
Very good, right? So it's very, very scientific why they do this. So when you look at a plate of food, what I've noticed, my friend, is that, man, this is wild. When you start in our program, we have people measure their food. We start with 4 ounces of lean meats, veggies, and fruits. 80% of people tell me there is no way I can eat all this. Why? Because for the first time in their life, they're eating foods that actually nourish them. When you eat white bread, sugars, it tricks your brain into thinking you're not full. I hope people will understand this. Sugar tricks your brain into thinking you can eat more.
The way
Fat
I explain
doesn't
it
do
to
that.
my kids is that because they're not getting any nutrition from the white stuff, their brain is telling them to, I mean, it's probably going to be like an infinitesimal amount of nutrition in the white stuff, and that's all it's getting. So say, give me more of that white stuff because apparently that's all I'm going to get my nutrition from. And so you end up eating 90% to get the 10% of the good stuff. Would you expand on that?
Well, that's a good example for a kid. It's not exactly what's happening, but for a kid, it's a nice description. Sugar literally tells your brain that you can eat more. That's it. Fat triggers your brain to be full. Sugar triggers hormones to say you're still hungry. That's it. There's no other explanation. That's what sugar and fat do. That's why you can eat a box of donuts, but you can't eat a box of steaks. Fat tells you, you're right. Fat tells you when you're actually full. I want to make sure people hear this. When you burn fat, you can trust your God-given hunger mechanism. When you burn sugar, you can't trust your God-given hunger mechanism. It's inaccurate. So that's why we switch everything over because it just isn't the case. When you go to a restaurant, if you've got 4 ounces of steak, 4 ounces of veggie, and 4 ounces of fruit, there's really not much room to have bread. I mean, you're absolutely full. My patients are stuffed. They're stuffed for 40 days. They've never felt so full in their life because they can trust their hunger mechanism.
I love it. And I think it's a perfect sort of peak moment to
Yeah.
end on. It's almost like a cliffhanger. In the show notes, I'm going to put in there a link to there's a free guide that Dr. Goldman is going to share with everybody. Everybody listening, have a blessed week and enjoy being full.